Hey, my name is Bob Kafka. I'm an organizer with REV UP Texas. REV UP Texas stands for Register, Educate, Vote, Use Your Power. REV UP was organized to increase the involvement of the disability community in electoral politics, to educate our members in the state of Texas. We have sent out written surveys and have offered both candidates an opportunity to have Zoom interviews. Today's interview is with MJ Hegar, who is running for the office of the United States Senate in the state of Texas. I'd like to welcome you. Our interviewer will be Linda Latowski, and I'll turn it over to Linda right now. Thank you very much for participating, and we hope to do the same with your opposition. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. I have 6 questions for you. The first is about community integration.
Okay.
This year marks the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. What would you do as senator to fulfill the goals of the ADA to eliminate discrimination of individuals with disabilities and end unnecessary segregation?
Well, thank you for the question, Linda, and thank you, Bob. Thank you both for having me and for all of the amazing work that you're doing now, but that also you have contributed through decades to our country. I think that the ADA is a civil rights accomplishment, and it ensures that communities are accountable and can serve all of their citizens, and we need to uphold and enforce the protections that Congress has already put into law, including rules about physical access to public spaces and services. This is something that I've worked a lot with disabled veterans on. We should pass legislation along the lines of the Bipartisan Disability Integration Act to ensure that people with disabilities can exercise their right to live and work and receive services in integrated settings. But beyond legislation, I think that there's a responsibility to elected officials to, shine a light on and increase transparency to people who are not in compliance. I think there's a lot of good laws on the books that are not being enforced. And this is one that I think, somebody who's elected to a position like a senator really needs to listen to constituents and to groups like yours when they're trying to raise a red flag that something is not being done well.
Thank you.
Thank you. The second question is on healthcare. The Affordable Care Act, or the ACA, provides critical protections for people with disabilities, including pre-existing conditions protections, prohibitions on life limits, time limits, and annual caps. How would you improve the current ACA, and what would your policy response be if the U.S. Supreme Court repeals part or all of the Affordable Care Act?
So this is a big part of why I'm running. The Supreme Court, especially with the news of last night with the passing of Justice Ginsburg, it is really scary that the Affordable Care Act is coming before the Supreme Court now. And if the votes go down partisan lines and we end up with a 4-4 vote, then the lower court's ruling stands and the Affordable Care Act will be abolished, which is my opponent, John Cornyn, has been labeled the Affordable Care Act repeals top salesman. He's voted 20 times to tear down the Affordable Care Act, despite the fact that that would take away healthcare from millions of Texans in the middle of a pandemic, by the way, but even before the pandemic, that was atrocious. As the Affordable Care Act was being implemented, I was actually working in healthcare, and I got to see the benefits and the impact to patients and providers. And I also got to see the immediate action taken by politicians to sabotage and undermine it, to try to make it fail. It's a big part of why the hyperpartisanship of our government is so bad, because our legislators are looking at what the party was of the individual who was responsible for the legislation or the accomplishment, instead of whether or not that legislation had a positive impact on their constituents. I think we have to protect the progress made by the Affordable Care Act while making the much needed improvements, like capping the share of income that families can spend on premiums, funding reinsurance to stabilize the market. We can't let John Cornyn and his political cronies succeed in their efforts to take us back to a place where insurance companies were able to discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions or sell junk plans that leave folks vulnerable when serious health issues or injuries occur. Most people don't realize that they have pre-existing conditions. I mean, I've had kids, and pregnancy is a pre-existing condition. People are often surprised when they find out how many things are covered under pre-existing conditions that they could be discriminated against for. And I think you can see it in my opponent's messaging, how he says he wants to protect pre-existing conditions, but he's been actively, aggressively fighting to break away those protections with the Affordable Care Act. So we just need to make sure that we're doing our homework on the people that we're voting for and see if somebody's pretty words actually match the actions that they've taken and the votes that they've made. I think that we need to do more, though, than just fix the Affordable Care Act. Healthcare is the number one thing I hear about on the campaign trail. It's a life and death issue. It's also an economic issue. The best healthcare that I ever received was when I was on military Medicare, which is called TRICARE. And, when my pre-existing condition was growing in my belly, my first kiddo, I was looking at being laid off by my healthcare job. And I was eventually laid off by that job. And, when we were bought out, my entire department went away. And, facing that worry and that fear about where I'm going to get my healthcare from is something that I think not enough of our legislators have ever experienced that fear and let alone ever worked a minimum wage job or been laid off at all or worried about whether or not Social Security would be there for them. John Cornyn is on 3 taxpayer funded pensions. And so he's not worried about things like that. He's never worried about being discriminated against for a pre-existing condition. And I just think we need more people in office who understand that. And so I'm for a public option because I would like to make all Texans have access to Medicare. I'm also going to fight for our ability to choose what access to quality, affordable healthcare looks like for our families, because I'm not a big fan of forcing people into things.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question is about employment. What would you do to provide people with disabilities meaningful opportunities for integrated employment? How would you eliminate sheltered employment that pays sub-minimum wages? And third, how is education related to integrated employment?
So I believe that every Texas worker deserves to be compensated fairly for their labor, regardless of disability or gender or color. And I will advocate for fair wages and workplace protections for everyone. Sheltered workplaces and the sub-minimum wages go against Texas values. We value hard work. We value compensation for that work. We value the value of work of every member of our society. And I believe that disabled workers should have access to adequate training programs to ensure access to meaningful opportunities for integrated employment. In particular, young people with disabilities deserve equal opportunity to learn job skills before and during their entry into the workforce. Through both early work opportunities in high school and post-secondary education, including 2- and 4-year college degrees and vocational programs, removing obstacles to these educational experiences is one of the biggest things that I think that we can do to increase access to integrated employment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next one is community-based services. How will you work to ensure that individuals can receive community-based services in an affordable, accessible housing that's also inclusive to live as independently as possible? And what is your position on turning Medicaid into a block grant program?
Well, I am against turning Medicaid into a block grant program, and this idea of independence is something that I think any of us who have worked with disabled veterans in particular really understand. We have a high incidence of suicide among veterans, and a big part of that is losing that independence that they had before their disability. And so, for people born with disabilities or who become disabled later, that idea of independence is something that is very personal to me. Individuals receiving community-based services shouldn't be forced into isolation or distance from their communities. And I fully support Medicaid services and initiatives such as Money Follows the Person, the Money Follows the Person program that are designed to ensure robust access to community-based services. and will allow people with disabilities to transition from institutions back into the community. I'll also ensure that Texas is following the guidelines set by Medicaid's home and community-based service programs, so that those with disabilities have access to their community and opportunities for integrated employment with fair wages and relationships beyond their care network.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much. This question is kind of for the future. It's about the 2030 census. How would you support having a question about disability on future censuses?
Well, I mean, we have to make sure that all people with disabilities have access to the census and avoid undercounting this population. This involves reaching out to community groups and advocacy organizations and support systems where people with disabilities can access adequate resources. We also have to continue to ensure virtual accessibility to the census and review measures to further improve the online platform. Funding programs like Medicaid, supportive housing, and state councils rely on census data. So we have to ensure an accurate count that's inclusive of people with disabilities.
Thank you very much. The final question is about your vision. Why are you the best candidate for U.S. Senator to represent the disability community? And what do you want to say to people with disabilities?
You know, I think there's a lot of people legislating right now who have had limited experience with challenges. And I think overcoming those challenges makes you so much of a stronger person, and it's really important experience that's underrepresented in DC right now. As a survivor of domestic and sexual assault, domestic violence and sexual assault, and having been injured during my military service, I know from personal experience that federal policies don't always reflect the needs and experiences of people with visible and invisible disabilities. I'm committed to listening to and learning from your community's perspective on issues that are beyond my personal experience, and fighting alongside you for legislation that empowers the disability community and promotes accessibility and inclusion. I went to DC as a private citizen to take on bureaucrats and powerful special interests, and I was able to build a broad bipartisan coalition to do something that made our military and our country stronger. We don't need more partisan career politicians who answer to their political bosses and their corporate special interests, and not to the constituents and the voters and the people in the communities that they're supposed to represent. We need leaders with a proven record of taking on tough fights and serving their country instead of their own self-interests to get our government up and working again for regular Texans. I'll always fight alongside you to ensure that every American has the opportunity to reach their full potential, regardless of how those Americans are categorized by the powers that be.
Thank you, Ms. Hegar. Your answers will really help to educate our community when they're making the choice on November 3rd or before. Hopefully early voting will be for all disabled Texans and their supporters. Thank you very much for this interview.
Yes, sir. Thank you.